Even with the great season that the Sacramento Kings just had and the countless awards that they won for it, we can't even get to training camp before people around the NBA start sleeping on Sacramento. Early power rankings are out. I'll share with you where the Sacramento Kings land and disagreements with some of the teams, especially in the West, ranked ahead of them. It's all right here on Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all offseason long. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports reporter and producer for ABC 10 News here in the California capital. And typically, early season power rankings mean nothing to us in Sacramento, right? Over the years, early season power rankings have mainly just been a reminder of, oh yeah, people don't think the Sacramento Kings are going to be very good. Thinking back to early power rankings last season, the Kings were in the low teens. Nobody expected the Kings to have the year that they just had, which is fine. Last year is a perfect example of some team will be ranked low that ends up finishing better than expected when the end of season power rankings come out, going into playoff time. And then some teams that are ranked at the very top or high might not even be in the playoff picture. That's just how it shakes up. But it's fun to talk about, especially during the driest, longest, most boring part of the offseason. And this year, I actually was very interested to see where the Kings would fall in these very early power rankings because, like I said in the intro, they're coming off of a fantastic year. Things are changing. Overall, they had an offseason where they didn't make any drastic moves. They essentially are running this team back with a few additions, a few improvements, like Sasha Vezenkov drafting Colby Jones, trading for Chris Duarte. I only see really positives for the Kings and what they've done this offseason. Now, I understand if the rest of the league looks at the Sacramento Kings and says, well, they're basically just running it back with very minor additions, these mild moves that in reality aren't going to amount to too much. If that's their take, if that's what people believe, I understand that. And in reality, with this ESPN NBA early power rankings, where the Sacramento Kings fall, the number that they're at, I'm pretty much okay with. It's to be expected, and I'll share that number with you in a little bit. But when people are putting together these power rankings, a lot of factors are taken in. Some are valued more than others. It could be how the team performed last year, expectations for this upcoming year, moves that the team made or didn't make in the offseason, whether it's players, coaching staff, front office, what they did in the draft. It's a compilation of things, but some value maybe someone will value having stars on your team more than how that team has performed in the past with those stars. And that's going to be something that we're going to address and discuss in this podcast today when looking at some of the other teams ranked ahead of Sacramento. But where did the Kings land on this early power rankings? They land at 12th. Top half of the league is good. And 12 to me is essentially, on paper, it's that final non-play-in spot. Essentially not viewed as a play-in team. Or at least that's how it looks when you're just considering, right, there's 12 teams, 6 in the East, 6 in the West that are absolutely guaranteed to make it into the playoffs. The other 2 to 4 teams from 13, 14, 15, and 16 are, of course, play-in teams. And then everybody else below that is out of the playoffs. So the Kings being in the 12th spot, you could assume that these NBA power rankings believe that the Kings are just above that play-in tier and in that comfortable playoff tier in the NBA, even though they're just barely in there, which some of you may think, well, the Kings were the 6th seed last year. They should at least be top 10, or maybe they should be number 10 and a couple teams should be below them. If that's your gripe, I understand that, but around this range is kind of what I expected, that 10, 11, 12 range. What I didn't expect is the amount of teams from the Western Conference that are ahead of the Kings. So even though the Kings are in 12, and there's 12 teams that make it out of the play-in and actually into the playoffs outright, there's 2 conferences, right? And there are 6 teams in the West that are ranked higher than the Kings in these early power rankings. So top 12 doesn't really matter when the top 6 in your conference, according to these power rankings, are already decided. Essentially, these power rankings are saying that the Kings have the number 1 home court advantage play-in spot if these power rankings hold true. So who are the 6 teams in the West that are ahead of the Sacramento Kings? Number 1, the Denver Nuggets. They're at the number 1 spot in the power rankings. They just won an NBA championship. They're probably going to be very, 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 very good again. No surprise there. No issue with the Denver Nuggets being ranked higher than the Sacramento Kings. The second team in the West, the Suns. They're ranked 4th in the power rankings. Also don't have an issue with that. I think the Suns' biggest weakness, is their complete lack of depth. But when you have the starting lineup that they're going to roll out there with Devin Booker and Bradley Beal and Kevin Durant and DeAndre Ayton, and I'm sure I'm missing something. Like, that team is a good basketball team. That team is a frightening basketball team. That is a team built to win championships, and that is it. So, yes, I am 100% okay, even though I think the Kings can beat the Phoenix Suns and they're not untouchable. I am 100% okay with the Phoenix Suns being ranked higher than the Kings in the power rankings. Next team is the Los Angeles Lakers. They are ranked 7th in the overall power rankings. Lakers have made a big change really quickly, right? They were a really bad team. They had an excellent trade deadline last year, had an overall solid offseason this year. I understand, let's put it this way. I understand the Lakers being ahead of them. I do. I do think the Lakers are beatable. I understand the Lakers are old. I know a lot of the eggs in the Lakers basket fall onto the laps of LeBron James and Anthony Davis and their star power that can carry them through, although they did add good depth, complementary pieces, bringing back Austin Reeves, Rui Hachimura. Like, that is a decent team. They added Gabe Vincent, which I think is a great pickup for them, and I hate it because now I can't root for Gabe anymore. Stockton's own Gabe Vincent here in Northern California going to play with the Lakers. Yuck. But the Lakers, they're a good basketball team. Do I think they're miles ahead of the Sacramento Kings? No. For them to be in 7th in the NBA power rankings and the Kings to be in 12th, this is where I say they probably are valuing stars a little bit more than they should, because I don't think the gap between the Kings and the Lakers is that big, but I'm okay with the Lakers being ranked ahead of the Kings. Next team, the Golden State Warriors. They're ranked 8th in the power rankings. The Warriors just beat the Kings in a playoff series. The Warriors still have Steph Curry on their team. The Warriors brought Draymond Green back. They added Chris Paul, who nobody knows how that's going to work. But they've really committed to this. We're going old and trying to win right now, and we don't care what tomorrow brings. And we're going to go play bingo together and watch Golden Girls. Like, they don't care. They are definitely diving headfirst into that older, experienced team that also, like the Phoenix Suns, is absolutely trying to win now and capitalize on the time that Curry has in his prime, and Clay and Draymond and all that group together. So I'm okay with the Warriors being ranked higher than the Kings. Again, I don't think the gap between the Warriors and Kings is big at all. If anything, I think the playoffs proved that the Kings are nipping right at the heels of the Warriors. And if the Kings and Warriors got a chance to meet in the playoffs again, I think things would go differently and in the Kings' favor this year. So those are 4 teams that are ahead of the Kings in the West in this power rankings. Remember, I said 6. The 5th team, a team that finished higher than the Kings in the Western Conference standings, the Memphis Grizzlies. They are ranked 10th in the power rankings, 2 spots ahead of Sacramento. Of course, the Memphis Grizzlies are going to deal with not having Ja Morant for an extended period of time. I can't remember what the suspension was, 25 games or something like that. Does that put them deep in the hole? They got the addition of Marcus Smart this offseason, which I think was a huge, huge addition for them. Jaren Jackson Jr. is playing really well, Defensive Player of the Year. Steven Adams is unbelievably important to that team. He missed a lot of time with injury. We'll see how he fares and when he comes back, what he looks like. For last season alone, I'm kind of okay with the Grizzlies being ranked ahead of the Kings. I guess 2 spots in the power rankings is not that big of a deal. But I think the let's put it this way. The Grizzlies were that team that the Kings wanted to be a couple of years ago, right? They were skyrocketing, moving in the right direction. Their 2nd overall pick turned out to be really good, unlike the 2nd overall pick that the Kings selected a handful of years ago. Don't need to say anything more than that about that. Added Jaren Jackson Jr., was playing good defense, good group together, made it to the playoffs, gave the Warriors a good run for their money. Like the the Grizzlies were on this upward trajectory that the Kings wanted to follow. And then here the Kings are kind of doing the same thing starting last season. Now, while the Kings are continuing to trend up, I think the Grizzlies are plateauing to maybe a little bit wobbling towards down because of the issues that they're having with their star Ja Morant and their issues off the floor. Now, I do believe the Memphis Grizzlies can survive and overcome the time that Ja Morant is out. We've seen that they've been a good enough basketball team to win without him when he's been hurt or gone for other reasons in the past. But with the improvements that I expect the Sacramento Kings to win, it should not surprise anybody if the Kings are a better basketball team than the Memphis Grizzlies. And just giving them the spot ahead of the Kings on last season's rankings alone, while I understand it, I think in the end it's going to be proven that last season didn't matter as much. And when it comes to this season, I think the Sacramento Kings are going to be a better team. I take a little bit of issue with the Grizzlies being ranked ahead of the Kings, but again, I understand it. I do not understand this last team being ranked ahead of the Kings. I can try and talk myself into it, and while I can make an argument for it, I don't believe that argument. The Los Angeles Clippers are the 6th team in the West ranked higher than the Kings in the power rankings. They're ranked 11th, one spot ahead of Sacramento. So in terms of the power rankings numbers, the Kings are not that much worse of a team than the Clippers, but they're still worse, and they're still expected to finish below with a worse record than the Los Angeles Clippers are. I think that's silly. I think that's foolish. The Clippers are older. They're injury prone. They have had very little time together as a cohesive team, as a unit on the floor. They're underwhelming. They're not on the same page. While we had this Sacramento Kings team that, even though they haven't spent a lot of time together, they played one of the best and most exciting brands of basketball the NBA has ever seen, averaged the most points per game in the regular season in NBA history, and are sticking together and only building upon that with a younger roster and up-and-coming stars who are able to stay healthy and stay on the floor and don't need to miss a month of the season for load management purposes only to make it to the playoffs and get hurt or lose again. The Kings are a better team than the Los Angeles Clippers are. They are. The Clippers have bigger stars, bigger names. Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, Russell Westbrook, like boom, stars. If this were 3 years ago, everybody would be going crazy. But they're not. They're still very good basketball players. And if you were putting player versus player comparisons, Kawhi versus Fox, if you want to choose Kawhi, I don't necessarily blame you. If you want to choose Paul George over Domantas Sabonis, I don't necessarily blame you. If you want to choose Russell Westbrook over Keegan Murray, I don't necessarily blame you. But you need more than just stars to win, especially stars that, again, have dealt with tremendous amounts of injury issues and can't seem to stay long on the floor long enough, not just to win a championship, which was their initial goal when they added Paul George and Kawhi Leonard to the Clippers roster down there, but they can't stay on the floor long enough to find out how to consistently play well together to have a chance of even making a deep playoff run. Why? Other than the star names on the roster, why would anybody think the Clippers are better than the Kings? That is the only argument for the Clippers ahead of the Kings. Because in other aspects, on the floor, the Kings have better shooting. The Kings play with better pace. The Kings have better passing and playmaking. The Kings have way better player availability. They don't have to be lucky when it comes to injury issues to have better player availability than the Los Angeles Clippers. De'Aaron Fox is not going to load manage for 20 games. Domantas Sabonis is not going to load manage for 20 games. They don't need to. And on top of that, finally, the Kings have a way better bench and much better depth than the Los Angeles Clippers do. Other than the stars at the top of the roster, the Kings are a better built basketball team, had a better season last year, and even though there was just a 4-win gap in between the two with all the injuries that the Los Angeles Clippers dealt with, why should anybody believe that the Clippers are suddenly going to be healthy and are suddenly going to figure it out and suddenly everything's going to work out? It's been a disaster for them for the last couple of seasons. An absolute disaster. Now, I'm not wishing at all that Kawhi Leonard gets hurt again, or Paul George gets hurt again, or Russell Westbrook looks as bad as he looked with the Los Angeles Lakers. I'm not wishing that upon the Clippers. But why should we believe that suddenly it's going to work out just because they have big names on their roster? It's the same thing that people have been saying for the last 2-3 years with that team. This is the year they're really going to click. This team's too talented to be where they're at. And yet, they're load managing to save themselves for the playoffs, and it's not mattering. They're missing a boatload of playing time during the regular season. They don't look cohesive as a unit, and they're still getting hurt. Why are the Clippers a better basketball team than the Sacramento Kings? They should not be. The Clippers are hoping to improve simply by staying healthy. The Kings are going to improve because this team is coming together for a second straight year. It's a cohesive unit that does know how to play with one another, filled with young players who are in their prime or entering their prime with a clear path to improvement. I'm taking the Kings over the Clippers every day of the week, and that's not just me being the Kings host wearing Kings purple glasses. I'm pretty confident that if you were to poll 1,000 NBA fans and say you could have the Kings roster and the Kings the present and the future, or the Clippers roster with the present and the future, and all the injury issues and all the baggage attached to it, I'd like to believe most people have a brain and would choose the Sacramento Kings in that scenario. Kings are a better team than the Clippers. The Kings should be in that 11th spot, 6th in the Western rankings, and the Clippers should be in 7th. I have no problem with the gap between the two teams being small. No problem at all. But the Clippers being ahead of the Kings at this point in time, that is literally just a decision based off of the names on the roster, not what they've actually been able to do, or specifically what they've been not able to do, have not been able to do, and how they've not been able to stay healthy over the years that they have been together. Again, Grizzlies, they're a better defensive team, so I have no issue with that. I would take the Sacramento Kings offense over the Grizzlies defense. I do think that the Kings can surpass the Grizzlies this year if they don't handle the Ja Morant suspension well, and if things with like Marcus Smart don't necessarily work out. And also on top of that, like Steven Adams is so important to that team. We'll see what Steven Adams looks like coming back. But I would not take issue at all with anybody choosing the Kings over the Memphis Grizzlies in this case as well. In fact, when we get to the end of season power rankings, or forget the end of season power rankings, when we get to the end of the season and we're looking at playoff seeding, I expect the Sacramento Kings to be ahead of both the Grizzlies and the Clippers at that time. You can save this clip and either make me look like an idiot when I'm wrong, or maybe I look good when I'm right, and in that case, you'll probably never show it to me again. So how would the Kings fare? In my opinion, how would the Kings fare against all these teams ranked ahead of them in an actual playoff series? We'll go through that. Plus, we'll take a look at the teams in the East that the Kings are ranked lower than. And we'll look at some of the teams in the East and the West that the Kings are ranked higher than. That's all coming up in just a second. Like I said at the top of the show, today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, take a swing at betting MLB on FanDuel, and you can get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. If you just bet $20 on your first bet, you will get $200 in bonus bets whether you win or you lose. So if you win and you're already in the green, here's $200 more of bonus bets for you to get further into the green. If you lose, here's $200 of bonus bets for you to get back into the positive and then make more money even on top of that. Because FanDuel doesn't want you to just come, win once and leave, or show up, lose all your money, and leave and never play again. They want you to stick around and have fun, because that's the name of the game at FanDuel, and that's what sports betting should be. Fun, not just crazy, chaotic, and terrifying. You can do all your sports betting on an app that is safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on the MLB than on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Sign up today. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. All right, let's look at some of the teams ahead of the Kings in the Eastern Conference. First is the Milwaukee Bucks. No issue with that. They're ranked second. Next is the Boston Celtics. No issue with that. They're ranked third. Next is the Miami Heat. Kind of small issue with that, but not really. I understand it completely. They're ranked fifth. 76ers, another kind of small issue with that. They have Joel Embiid, the MVP. They're a mess with James Harden, and who knows how that's going to work out. So it wouldn't surprise me if the Kings end up being a better team than the 76ers because of all that drama they're dealing with. But as of right now, I understand the 76ers being ranked sixth and ahead of the Kings. Then there's the Cleveland Cavaliers, ranked ahead of the Kings at ninth. It's a good basketball team. They've underperformed. They underperformed last season, had a bit of a disappointing season last year. I don't know necessarily. I'll have to talk to the Cavs host to kind of get an idea of what the expectations are for the Cavs. I think the expectations are for them to be a good team. I don't necessarily think they're in that absolutely got to win a championship tier like the Celtics and the Bucks and maybe the 76ers are on. But I still understand the Cavs being ranked higher than the Kings. They've kind of been here a little bit longer. They have really, really good players on that roster with decently high expectations. So in reality, the 5 teams in the Eastern Conference ranked ahead of the Kings in the power rankings doesn't surprise me. I have no issue with, although I could see the Kings finishing better in the standings with more wins than the Cavs, than the 76ers, and even the Miami Heat if they drop off a little bit from what they were last season. They lost Gabe Vincent, which isn't a massive loss for them, but I think it's a pretty big loss. Of course, we don't know if they're going to land Dame Lillard or not. My gut feeling is that Dame Lillard will not be on their team at least to start the season, and we'll see if he's traded there at any point in time. But I don't think the Miami Heat, despite the fact they just made it to the Eastern Conference champions and they just made it to the NBA Finals, I don't think the Miami Heat are as hard for the Sacramento Kings to catch as teams like the Bucks or the Celtics are at this point in time. I'm not predicting the Kings will be better than the Heat, Cavs, or 76ers, but it wouldn't surprise me necessarily if they were better than them. All right, let's look at some of the teams, some of the big-name teams that the Kings are ahead of. There are a lot of Western Conference teams bunched up right around the Kings' range. The Dallas Mavericks, ranked 14th. I'm glad someone or whoever made these power rankings believes that the Kings are a better team than the Dallas Mavericks, because they absolutely are. The Oklahoma City Thunder are 15th. I did not expect to see the Thunder in these preseason or early power rankings ahead of some of the teams that they're ahead of, but I'm glad they are, because I do think the Oklahoma City Thunder are going to be a good basketball team, a team that's hard to beat. And matchup-wise, we'll have to see, but that might be a tough matchup for Sacramento, just like the Timberwolves were a tough matchup for Sacramento last year. Speaking of the Timberwolves, they're one spot behind the Thunder at 16th. And then you have the New Orleans Pelicans, one spot behind the Timberwolves at 17th. So what does this tell me? This tells me that these power rankings believe that it is a logjam once again in the Western Conference. And the Kings are right in the middle of that pack. They're not at the very top amongst the Denver Nuggets and Phoenix Suns, who are the only 2 teams that I think should be at the very top. I think they should be more in the tier of the Lakers, Warriors, Grizzlies, and Clippers than they are of the Magic, Thunder, Wolves, and Pelicans. But there are a lot of teams that could potentially make a run at making it into the playoffs. And once again, the Kings are put into this box of, well, if they make the playoffs, they're barely going to make it in, and there's a very good chance that they could be a play-in team. You might be right, and I know a lot of people were concerned here in Sacramento that the Kings would regress to that based off the fact that, 1, 48 wins last season typically is not good enough to win you a 3rd seed, and 2, the Kings didn't add many or any really major improvements or big moves this offseason. I'm not saying that you're wrong, and I'm not saying that these rankings are wrong. I don't feel that way. I feel very confident that the Kings are going to improve, that running this team back absolutely was the right decision, and that the Kings are set up and in a position to prove that last year's season wasn't a fluke, and that they can absolutely build upon that and be a over 50 win team. So I'm pretty confident in the Kings securing themselves as a right to the playoffs team. I don't know if they'll be a 3rd seed again. I don't know if they'll have home court advantage again. I don't know if that matters as much as maybe it has in the past. This Kings team just needs to make it back to the playoffs first and foremost, and then worry about, no matter who they're playing or no matter if they have home court advantage or not, worried about making it out of that first round. But I'm glad the Kings are ahead of the Mavs, Thunder, Wolves, and Pelicans in the power rankings, even if it's only by a handful of spots. And then I included this too. The Pacers are 21st in the power rankings. I don't bring that up as a Pacers and Tyrese Halliburton lovers. I don't mean it like that. I just mean the Pacers got off to a really, really good start last season, and I think the Pacers are a decent basketball team. I actually think 21 is a little too low for them. I would probably put them in the mix of these Mavs, Thunder, Wolves, Pelicans teams, but that's just where I'm at. All right, so let's look at the teams in the West, again, that were ranked higher than the Kings, and I'm going to share with you how I feel the Kings would fare right now in a best-of-7 playoff series against those teams. We'll start with the Denver Nuggets. The Kings likely lose that series, right? I think the Kings would push it to 5 or 6 games, maybe 7 if a lot of things go right. But I'm a realist. I'm realistic. I'm realistic sometimes. I'm realistic. I think the Kings would absolutely lose to the Denver Nuggets. in a best-of-7 playoff series right now, although I think they'd put up a good fight. Kind of same thing with the Phoenix Suns. I'm not as sure the Kings would lose as I am against the Denver Nuggets, but that Suns team has star power. I think the Kings could push that to 6 or 7 games because the Suns don't have the depth that the Kings have, and depth is a huge advantage of Sacramento. That's actually a topic, something I'm going to discuss in a podcast later on this offseason, just how good the Kings' depth is compared to a lot of the rest of the league. And that depth might be enough for the Kings to really at least scare the Suns a little bit, but we should treat the Suns and look at the Suns how they should be looked at, which is a team that is built with so much star power solely and purposely to win right now. So the expectation should be that they will win right now if they face the Sacramento Kings. Not saying they blow the Kings out, but I think it's fair to expect that the Suns would beat the Kings in the playoff series. The Los Angeles Lakers, absolutely beatable. I expect the Lakers would be favored in that series, probably rightfully so. The Lakers are absolutely beatable in a playoff series if you're the Sacramento Kings, not just because the Kings are a younger team and can move up and down the floor, and I think the Kings are actually a pretty good matchup, or the Lakers maybe, let me put it this way. I think the Kings are a bad matchup for the Lakers in a lot of ways. While the Lakers do have the star advantage and certainly the experience advantage, we just saw the Golden State Warriors have the star and experience advantage and really struggle, and it took 7 games for them to put this Kings team away. I think the Kings could absolutely beat the Lakers, but I think the Lakers should be and would be favored in a Kings and Lakers playoff series. As for the Golden State Warriors, to me, it's a total coin flip. Total coin flip, and if we're leaning in any one direction, if any team should have the edge, even though the Golden State Warriors beat the Kings in the playoffs last year, I think the Kings should have the edge this year. I'm pretty confident that this series is probably going 6 or 7 games again, and this time it's going to be the Kings that are going to figure out how to close it out. The Warriors are getting older. Chris Paul doesn't scare me. Kings are now more experienced. I think the Sacramento Kings beat the Golden State Warriors in a playoff series if they get the chance to match up again, but I'm okay with it being a coin flip. Grizzlies, maybe another coin flip. I'm picking the Kings to win in 6 or 7 games there. Again, a lot of it has to do with what the team looks like when John Morant comes back, if he doesn't do something stupid and get himself suspended again, and how healthy Steven Adams is and how much that Marcus Smart addition helps them. But the Kings definitely could beat the Grizzlies in a playoff series. I think that would actually be a really fun playoff series. And then finally, this won't surprise you, if the Kings and Clippers met in the playoffs, the Kings are winning that playoff series in 5 or 6 games. I'm so confident in that. Despite the star power of the Los Angeles Clippers is enough for them to win 2 or 3 games max against the Kings. They're not beating the Kings 4 times. Again, save this. Make me look like an idiot if I'm wrong. But when the Kings and Clippers meet in the playoffs this season, make sure you have this on standby, because when the Kings win in 4, 5, or 6 games, you'll know I'm right. The Kings are a better team than the Los Angeles Clippers. The Kings would beat the Clippers in a playoff series. I feel very confident in that. I want to hear your thoughts on these power rankings, your thoughts on where the Kings fall, and your thoughts on how the Kings would fare against these other Western Conference teams. If you have issues with the power rankings or if you agree with the power rankings, let me know. You can reach me on Twitter at MattGeorgeSack. You can email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com. And, of course, you can leave your thoughts in the YouTube comment section down below. Coming up on the next episode of the Locked On Kings podcast, I'm going to be joined by NBC Sports' Tom Dierberger. He is a recent addition to NBC Sports, fairly recent. He started working, I don't actually know how long he's been working for NBC Sports, but started seeing him around Sacramento Kings games and working for NBC Sports California and Bay Area last season. Got to meet him, got to get to know him a little bit, so I'm excited to have him on the podcast for the first time to chat a little Kings basketball with him. That's coming up on the next episode of Locked On Kings. And then I have 2 big topics on future episodes coming up here that I want to talk about. And I would love to get your thoughts on it and prepare your takes and start thinking about this a little bit. Number 1, the first topic. How does the Kings bench and their depth shake up around the rest of the league? I think the Kings will have one of the best benches in the league going into this season. I feel pretty confident in that, but we'll dive into that a little bit more. And then the other topic, let's talk about Kevin Huerter and talk about how important Kevin Huerter is to the success of the Sacramento Kings. I think Kevin Huerter's importance to this Kings team actually is a little bit underrated. I'll explain that. Again, that's a conversation, a topic for a future episode of Locked On Kings, probably next week. Also, I just want to let you know. I can't say specifically what's happening, but something really cool is happening for the Locked On Kings podcast, something that has not happened before, but something we've been working on and working towards for a while. It's just further elevating the status of this podcast. And it's just another example of how this podcast has grown, how fortunate enough I am to be a part of this podcast, and how amazing the Sacramento Kings fan base is for supporting this podcast for the almost 7 years that I've been hosting it, with the majority of those seasons, of course, in those years being the Kings being a bad basketball team. Like, I'm so fortunate, I'm so lucky, and I'm excited for if everything works out and everything that's going on, to explain and describe a little bit more, because it'll allow us to do some pretty cool things coming next season here on Locked On Kings. So I'm very much hoping to be able to say more about that. Sorry it's so cryptic, but things are in the works, and I'm very excited about it. So I had to tease it or talk about it just a little bit here. But I really appreciate your support, as always. Can't wait to have you join me on the next episode of the Locked On Kings podcast. So I'll see you then. Until then, my name is Matt George. You have been listening to Locked On Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.